Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build MLB edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith, ready to go down over this pretty sizable MLB main slate over at DraftKings. First off, let's just check out the weather. Nothing crazy. Milwaukee and Philadelphia are facing off here. First game we're going to look at, it's just moderate weather with a possible delay, but there's no PPD risk anywhere that we know of, so nothing to be too concerned about. I think the only other game that anybody would be really worried about would be Colorado, but that one also is not a major risk. So moving right along, let's go over to this first game, Taylor. We got Bryce Wilson taking on the Phillies at Citizens Bank. Not really favoring the Bryce Wilson side of this. Obviously, he's cheap at 6.2K, but he does not sport a very friendly K rate, and he's been struggling against lefties. Obviously, you can see on the screen, 260 ISO this year, 409 WOBA, 12.5% walk rate, and still just 20% K rate against lefties. So none of that is good. Obviously, it's a very bad park for him, and they have a ton of really good lefties. So yeah, I'm assuming you have a little bit of interest in the Phillies. They're not really cheap at a high level, but they look good.
Yeah, I'm actually not really getting to either Wilson or the Phillies right now. I guess it's just kind of a price thing with them. He's cheap, but there's another cheap guy I kind of have my eye on that is bad, but cheap. I'd rather not pick on the Phillies with a cheap guy. I'd rather pick on a worse team with a cheap guy that we'll get to later. Yeah, Phillies, obviously look good, high total, decent matchup. Wilson hasn't been like a gas can. So I don't know. It's kind of looks like I'm prioritizing some other offenses, namely Coors on this slate.
Yeah, well, I reckon Coors is going to be relatively chalky, and for good reason, I suppose. It's very simple for me. I don't mind getting a sprinkling of the Phillies at all. They look pretty good, especially from the left side. I have zero interest in Bryce Wilson, although I note that 6.2K is obviously cheap for SP2, but he just doesn't look like he's in a good spot here. So it's Phillies or bust, although I'm not like fully committed to the Phillies just because they're not cheap. On the other side, obviously, Zach Wheeler looks really good at 10.7K. He's got a solid K rate, very good K rate against righties at 34%. He does struggle against lefties a little bit on the year, 11% walk rate, 174 ISO. He's bounced back from a complete blow-up game. He had -5 fantasy points 4 starts ago against the Marlins of all teams. He's honestly been really, really good all year. And he's had 21 plus fantasy points in each of the last 3 games since that blow-up game. That said, he is expensive, so I don't know how easy it is to get to a ton of Wheeler here. And I actually, if he's going to end up being chalky, I think when I first saw it, he was the chalkiest pitcher on the board, and here he is at 43%. I'm just going to update that just to make sure that is current, and I think it is. If he is going to be super chalky, I actually do not mind a sprinkling of the Brewers at all. Obviously, they get a park upgrade. They do have power, 175 collective ISO. They do have like 5 lefties in the projected lineup. A lot of power from the left side too. K rate coming around 22%, not crazy. So yeah, I don't mind the Brewers here that much. I just wouldn't be like overexposed to them because obviously I also like Wheeler here.
Yeah, I think I would just rather be on the Wheeler side. His blow-ups are pretty few and far between historically, and it's not. I mean, it's an okay slate overall for pitching. There are quite a few options. I don't think he's a must-play by any means. Pushing 11K, and the matchup is not ideal either. But Milwaukee is the team I'm getting to the least, which is not a surprise. Just low total. Plenty of actually bad pitchers or mediocre pitchers we can pick on. I get that Wheeler might be chalky, but I think the salary might leave him a little lower owned. Like there were some cheaper mid-range guys that might be more popular. So I don't think Wheeler's going to be owned to the point where we have to like lean into stacking against him.
No, and like we kind of normally say in this kind of situation, if it is to that point, probably the play would just to be not to use Wheeler and just get different at pitcher instead of trying to leverage a really, really good pitcher.
Yeah.
That said, in the name of Chris Sale, I do still have. I want a sprinkling if I'm going to be highly exposed to Wheeler, which I very well may be. I definitely will still get some Brewer stacks out there just because the dude's like 43% owned right now.
Was like 50. Percent under, so like
that's like 56%.
Yeah, so like
what?
That makes
but
sense.
Hey, 43% is still quite chalky on a slate.
I don't know. I would take the under on that personally, but see.
Right. That's fair if you think it's going to be lower. But if we can actually confidently say it would be there, then I would like to take advantage of that a little bit if I can. But I totally get it. All right, next one we got Mets and Nats. No, not really liking this side. Mackenzie Gore obviously has some strikeout upside going against the Mets. They don't strike out a ton, coming at 19% going against lefties. Tyler Megill is, I think he's popping kind of. They have a 24% K rate, so I think he'd be the pitcher I'd go to here. Not super inclined to target either of these offenses. Mackenzie Gore, what's his price at? 9K for Mackenzie Gore. Not really feeling that at this price tag. I do like him for strikeout upside, but not today. I think I would go Tyler Megill here. I think he looks pretty good. His price is only at 7.2K. Nice price. The Nats, CJ Abrams is not full strength, and he's kind of their best player. And they have a 24% collective whiff rate, so he looks pretty good. Thoughts?
He's fine. I don't think he's much different than McGill. He doesn't project that well. If Abrams is in, I like him less. If Abrams is out, obviously he might look a little bit better. But I don't know. Like, he's 7-2. It's not like he's a full punt. There is a punt, like I mentioned before, that I'm more inclined to get to. Not that I love it, but kind of is what it is. There are enough pitchers in the 8K range and one more kind of in McGill's exact range that looks a little bit better to me. So
I know who you're talking about. I know who you're talking about.
I would get to Washington. Like, if Abrams is in, I would get to Washington more because he's really struggled against lefties, and they have 3, 4, 5, 6 in the projected lineup with Abrams in. So not a very good spot for him, I don't think.
Yeah, but it's more of a price point play for me. And right now, the strikeouts that the Nats have, I guess we would just not be aligned here completely. I see the logic for sure, but I think just 7.2K is a pretty good price for him in this spot. On the other side, any interest in Mets or Mackenzie Gore?
I think Gore looks pretty good. It's not the easiest spot. The Mets don't really strike out that much against lefties, but bottom of the order is also pretty weak these days. He's just good in general. You can kind of argue that he might be a little underpriced for who he is. Good prospect, kind of breaking through now finally. I think he's fine. He's not going to be like one of my higher owned guys, but there's like a tier 2 beneath the guys we'll get to that he's in. I think he's perfectly fine. I would get to him in tournaments. The Mets, just because they do have some pretty good power from the right side with Alonso, JD, Lindor, all hitting well against lefties. Even Mark Vientos in a pretty small sample looks decent. So I could see both sides of this one. I have more interest in stacking the Mets against Gore than I do in the Brewers against Wheeler.
Yeah, I think anytime I want Gore, it's kind of just an upside play. And at this price, I don't know if that's really there. And the fact that the Mets do not strike out a ton, I think I'd be with you. I'd favor the Mets side of this for sure. If Gore was a little bit cheaper, I'd be a lot more into him. But at 9K, I think you're kind of paying for a combination of safety and upside. And I don't think we have that necessarily in this matchup. All right, so Baltimore visiting Toronto. We got Grayson Rodriguez facing the Jays. I guess Grayson Rodriguez is okay here, priced at 9.4. Not really excited about that. Kevin Gausman on the other side against Orioles. Not really excited to play him here either. They just have a 19% whiff rate against righties, and they have a 200 ISO, which is not great. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lefties, and he's really had a tough time against lefties this year. 204 ISO, 392 WOBA, and his strikeout rate dips a little bit too. So yeah, I actually like the Orioles a little bit here. Not super into the pitching on either side.
Well, I disagree on that one. I don't have much interest in Rodriguez. Like, I'd rather play Gore or, JV in that range. But Gausman is 8K flat, which is the reason I think he's popping for me a lot. Out of the 1,500 lineups I'm looking at, he's in 61% of them. Easily the highest exposed player I have at the moment. His numbers this season are admittedly concerning. Like, the Ks are way down from where they were, but the control's fine. The barrels are similar to what they were last year. I think he was not healthy to start the year, so the numbers are a bit inflated in a bad way. But his Sierra is good. ERA is a bit bloated. Not an easy spot, admittedly, against Baltimore, but I just think we're getting an underpriced pitcher that should arguably be 9 to 9.5, and he's 8K. So it is what it is. I'm not loving it, but he looks like the SP1 for me at the moment.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the logic. The problem is the Orioles are good. The numbers don't really look great for him. It just feels like a trap a little bit to me. So no doubt he has good K upside, and the price is egregious, undeniable.
It's also like historically has a pretty wide reverse split. So I don't know if I fully buy the 2024 numbers as gospel yet. Like lefties historically he's done better against. And if the Orioles are going to stack lefties against him, then in theory he should be a bit better.
In theory, I guess I'm just I don't know. I feel like the AK Gausman's a bit of a trap here. He's been very up and down all year, and the Orioles are not an easy lineup to get by at all. So I understand it. I don't hate it, but I'll probably be more on the Orioles side, especially since Gausman's carrying like 22% ownership. So if I'm like paying up for Wheeler and I don't want to eat the Gausman chalk, the Orioles look okay. I wouldn't be highly exposed to the Orioles, but I do not mind them as a GPP stack. On the other side, we have the Jays. You said you're not really interested in Rodriguez, so does that mean you're interested in Toronto stacks, or are you just kind of staying away from this game outside of Gausman?
Yeah, I'm not on to either of them. I think Grayson's overpriced, and Toronto's not a very good offense to begin with, so I don't love the spot for either of them.
Okay. All right, moving along, we got the Tigers. Tariq Skubal taking on the Rangers, and on the other side, we have Nathan Eovaldi against the Tigers. Obviously, Eovaldi looks pretty good here. Skubal always grades out well, other than the fact that the Rangers are not an easy lineup to take on, and he's 10.5K. So I find it a little bit hard to fall in love with Skubal here, but Eovaldi looks fine at 7.6K. I think he's solid. I think if the ownership, where's the ownership in these guys? Scooball's coming at 24%, and Eovaldi is not even owned at all. So yeah, even more reason to like him.
No.
I don't know. I don't. You think that's going to go up?
No, he threw 37 pitches in his first game back, so he's going to be pretty limited tonight, I would think.
He is going to be limited. Okay.
So he's cheap, but he only threw 3 innings. Any damage he gives up is going to really count against him because I don't think he can bounce back from it. So maybe that's like 50 to 60 pitches today. That's not enough.
No, that's a good point. Okay, so obviously with that information, I don't want him. But I don't.
Skubal is like similar to Wheeler for me. Like looks good. The matchup for Wheeler looks a little bit better. Texas does have some Ks in there though against lefties. Seager in particular has been pretty whiffy. Ditto for Garcia and Langford. So there's upside here. I think he looks interesting. He and Wheeler project.
I mean, by the numbers, the matchup is actually better for Skubal. The collective ISO for the Rangers against lefties right now is 128.
I just trust their overall talent more than the younger Milwaukee team right now. But
you've been
this season,
you're right. Brewers all year.
Well, I don't think they're that good, but
they're
proving me wrong every day.
They've been pretty darn good for the whole year. But yeah, I think at the price point against the Rangers, I think that's what it is for me. Is I'm with you, and is like the Rangers have that name recognition and just like are historically the more dangerous offense. So I find it very hard to click Skubal and feel really good about it, especially if he's going to be owned. So maybe a sprinkling of Rangers stacks. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be very exposed to Skubal personally. I think on a top level, as far as I would go Wheeler, and then I'm not going to anybody else until, maybe Gausman there at 8K a little bit. But I like a lot of the cheaper guys, to be honest. So as far as offenses go, with Eovaldi limited, are you liking the Tigers at all here? And are you mostly on Skubal as far as exposure to these teams?
I think the offenses look pretty bad. Don't want to pick on Skubal, even with a good offense. And Detroit just not a good lineup. A lot of bullpen in this game. Don't really need it tonight.
All right, on we go. Houston hosting St. Louis. Kyle Gibson. Taking on the Cardinals. or taking on the Astros, and we got JV Justin Verlander taking on the Cardinals. So the Cardinals have a 25% whiff rate here. JV looks pretty decent at 8.8K. I don't mind him. I think I kind of misspoke there. I think the next pricey guy after Wheeler that I'd be looking at would be JV. I think the strikeout matchup is solid. The numbers just don't look very dangerous at all for the Cardinals. JV was pretty darn good in his last game, 29 fantasy points. Good again the game before, 28. So the form has been pretty solid. On the other side, Gibson against the Astros, don't like that. The 6.5K price is there. But he's a 233 ISO allowed to lefties, 18% K rate, 10% walk rate. None of that sounds good when you have two monstrous lefties in Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez. So they obviously look like great one-offs, and then you can always complete the stack when it comes to somebody like Gibson. So I'm going JV. I don't mind the Astros, but I'm not exactly going out of my way to play them. But that's probably where I'm at in this game.
Yeah, Verlander looks good. I think he's not what he used to be. Obviously, he's 41, but in certain matchups, he can still pay off, as we've seen recently against Oakland and Seattle. St. Louis is probably not quite as bad, but they are very strikeout heavy, or pretty strikeout heavy. 24.6% this season against righties is high enough. And he's cheap, like 8.8 is reasonable. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing that he's going to be pretty chalky. So I suppose by that measure, you can stack St. Louis against him, and I am getting to them plenty. It's a park upgrade for them too, power-wise at least, but this looks like one I'm going to be playing both sides of. I'll have some Verlander, and I'll have some Cardinals against him.
Yeah. Cardinals, man. I hate playing the Cardinals. All right, moving on. We got the Coors Field game. You got the Reds visiting the Rockies. Andrew Abbott going up against Rockies, and then Ryan Feltner against the Reds. Obviously, the Reds look really, really good. The Rockies are still, they're the Rockies, but they are also in Coors here, so we can't ignore them. I actually like Andrew Abbott a deal here. He's only 6.8K. He's got decent, at least he has had decent strikeout upside in the past. He has not been that good this year in that regard. Obviously, it never feels great to play a pitcher at Coors. But they come in with a 22% collective whiff rate against Southpaws, and they're just not that scary of a lineup in general, even though it's a great park for hitting. On the other side, Reds look pretty darn good. They do strike out a good deal, but I don't fear Ryan Feltner, and I don't think anybody else does either. So I'm imagining you're kind of off the pitching and just, have no issues with the hitting here, though.
Yeah, these are my two highest stacks, which isn't always the case with Colorado, but Abbott is decent, but he's also wildly homer prone. He's allowed 11 already this season, including 10 against righties. Extreme fly ball guy, park downgrade. Obviously, his home park is also pretty bad for pitching, but yeah, they both look interesting. Obviously, I prefer the Reds because they have more talent, but Colorado is almost just as interesting. Like Tovar has been legitimately good. McMahon, even lefty has been pretty good. Brendan Rodgers, Elias Diaz, both look decent enough. They're expensive, but I think the cheap pitcher we haven't yet gotten to is a way to kind of afford the full game stack if you want it.
Yeah, worth noting, 237 ISO allowed to righties this year alone. 205 last year. So absolutely Abbott could have power issues in this park. But I actually don't mind him because I don't think he's going to be owned, and he's pretty cheap. But yeah, obviously it's Coors, so I don't dislike the Rockies either. Obviously I love the Reds too. Ownership might be a bit of an issue there though, just because I would like to get different if I can. But yeah. All right. So next game we got Matt Waldron, who I'm certain is the guy you're speaking of. And then also Tyler Anderson taking on the Padres, who don't ever strike out. So I would not have any interest in Tyler Anderson personally. I would have a decent amount of interest in the Padres. And then the other side, Matt Waldron does look good. The Angels have a 22% collective whiff rate against righties. He's been really good, honestly. But they do have a decent amount of power. So if he's going to be super owned, I would not hate playing a little bit of halos on this slate. But for the most part, if we're looking at it logically, Waldron is the standout play of this game.
He looks fine. He looks a little bit better than McGill to me. But Angels haven't been that atrocious in terms of strikeouts this season. against righties. Waldron is decent enough. It's more of a price thing than anything else, but I could see him being kind of popular. So that kind of gets me off him a little bit. I think that's pretty fragile chalk. Anderson, I'm waiting for him to struggle, but he keeps going out there in these really tough matchups. He's faced Kansas City, Texas, Houston, and the Yankees in his last 4 games, and he hasn't allowed more than 3 runs in any of them for some reason. I don't think he's a play because he's pushing 8K and Padres don't strike out, but gives me some cause for pause with San Diego, though in projections they still look good, and I'm probably going to go back to the well and play against Anderson again tonight and hope for the best. It is a part boost for the Padres for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think you said it best, man. I think it's like the easiest call is to just not play Anderson at that elevated price tag because they don't strike out. So where's the ceiling there for paying for him at almost 8K? There just isn't one. I don't think you have to stack Padres, but I am with you. I mean, eventually Tyler Anderson is probably going to become Tyler Anderson again to some degree. So
Hopefully.
I would think, I mean, they still are a pretty good lineup. At worst, you could do some one-offs with like Tatis and Cronenworth, whoever's in the lineup, I guess. But Mikado. But yeah, I think the Padres look totally fine. I don't have an issue with that whatsoever. All right, last game of the night, Arizona.
Have you seen Machado's numbers, by the way? Like, he looks horrible.
Well, he's still a good player. So, and it's Tyler Anderson. So I'm willing to take a shot. A little bit Padres. If I was rolling out 150 lineups, I would definitely get some exposure. If I'm doing a single entry, which I'm probably doing tonight, I don't think I'm stacking Padres, but I think they're totally fine. All right, last game, Giants and Padres. Giants and D-backs. Spencer Howard. Okay, is this who you're talking about? Spencer Howard. Spencer Howard against the D-backs and Ryan Nelson against the Giants. Nelson's facing a Giants lineup that comes in with almost a 25% K rate. His numbers are disgusting, but he's very cheap at 5.8K, and they do miss bats a little bit and offer basically no power here with a 113 ISO. Spencer Howard has a less advantageous matchup with Arizona coming out to 21% whiff rate and 139 ISO, but I don't know. I'm not like super motivated to play anybody in this game. If I did go one way, it'd probably be Arizona stacks, but I'm not crazy about the pitching or the offenses. I know you're one of those guys is your guy. I know that.
Yeah, it's Ryan Nelson.
Why?
It's like you got 5. That's the main reason. But they strike out plenty. They have very little power, like you said. Their WOBA against righties is under 300 on the season. It's just kind of a very punchless and strikeout heavy lineup, especially at the bottom. Bruce and Ramos and Isley all strike out quite a bit. Yastrzemski at the top. It's just a price thing. Like, he projects for 12 fantasy points, which I think I'd be thrilled by if I actually got that, because he's helping me get up to, Coors or the Astros or the Padres or someone like that. Yeah, it's a pure price thing. Howard only threw 49 pitches in his first game, so not a very long leash on him. I think Arizona is intriguing, and I think you can play the Giants because Nelson admittedly is not very good, but if I had to pick one thing from this game to play, it would be Nelson.
Okay, so here's the thing, though. This is not as bad of a play as I thought it looked like, especially from a price point perspective. Totally fine. You can always do that. I mean, we've talked about like Miles Mikolas before, so anything can be done when you're sub 6K. I think that even worked out, by the way, one of those times you did it. So some of these cheap punt calls, you've been like riding a bit of a heat wave with them, so maybe everybody should just listen to you and stop there. But I'll actually help you out a bit by saying the Giants are not healthy. They're missing like 3 key starters, Michael Conforto and Lamonte Wade being 2 of them. And more specifically, they can do damage from the left side, which is where Nelson has had the most trouble the last 2 years. So, I mean, 233 ISO, 341 WOBA to lefties this year, 380 WOBA, 237 ISO last year. So, yeah, it's a lot. It's a punchless Giants offense, even more so than it already would be. So I guess I'm okay with it. I just, if you look at his numbers, it looks gross. Like, there's nothing really good about him that makes me excited to play him. But the savings, really. and he's facing a not so great lineup. So I might end up doing a little bit of it myself. All right, so that does it for us for this breakdown. Hopefully it helps you out a little bit. If it does, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.